All right, let's just dive right into this. When you hear the name Ted Bundy, I'm willing to bet words like manipulative, charming, and psychopath instantly pop into your head. I mean, we toss that word psychopath around in pop culture like confetti these days, right? But what if the labels we've been fed by all those true crime documentaries are actually missing the mark? Was Bundy ever formally diagnosed with antisocial personality disorder? Did he actually meet the clinical criteria for psychopathy? And honestly, maybe the most important question for our understanding of forensic psychology, are those two things even the same?
Well, the answer is vastly more complicated than Hollywood makes it seem. Here's the reality check. Psychopathy does not equal antisocial personality disorder. They just aren't the same thing. In today's Explainer, we're going to use the infamous case of Ted Bundy to finally untangle these concepts. We'll break down the critical real-world differences between a strict psychiatric diagnosis, a forensic personality construct, and just a popular everyday label. And, we're going to look at exactly why those distinctions matter so incredibly much in the real world.
So here's our roadmap for today. First, the myth of Ted Bundy. Second, defining ASPD. Third, the psychopathy construct. Fourth, ASPD versus psychopathy. Fifth, the charming psychopath myth. And finally, number 6, explanation is not exoneration. Now, our goal here is absolutely not to glamorize an offender or, armchair diagnose someone from grainy old entertainment footage. We are just objectively breaking down forensic concepts so we can better understand behavior, risk, and responsibility.
All right, let's kick things off with Section 1, the myth of Ted Bundy.
So, during the 1970s, Bundy committed a truly terrifying series of abductions and murders across several states, ultimately confessing to 30 killings. His crimes involved intense planning and deception. He'd often approach victims faking an injury with a cast, or even impersonating an authority figure. And because of this, pop culture has built up this massive, almost mythical image of Bundy as an exceptionally intelligent, charming, criminal mastermind. But let's go ahead and deflate that myth right now. Charm is not intelligence, and confidence is definitely not competence. The truth is, Bundy made sloppy, highly consequential mistakes, he left behind physical evidence, and he arrogantly acted as his own lawyer in court, completely, and I mean completely, overestimating his own ability to outsmart the room. So his apparent confidence? We should never confuse that with flawless intelligence.
That brings us right into Section 2, defining antisocial personality disorder. Now, antisocial personality disorder, or ASPD, is a formally recognized psychiatric diagnosis in the DSM. It involves a pervasive, ongoing pattern of totally disregarding and violating the rights of others. So instead of just a random list of bad behaviors, I want you to think of it as a cohesive clinical pattern. We're talking repeated unlawful behavior paired with deceitfulness, impulsivity, irritability or aggression, a reckless disregard for safety, persistent irresponsibility, and a marked lack of remorse. It is heavily focused on documented, observable actions.
But here is a really fascinating forensic reality that almost everyone misses: the developmental requirement. To actually be diagnosed with ASPD as an adult, there literally must be documented evidence of conduct disorder symptoms before the age of 15. Plus, the person has to be at least 18 to get the full diagnosis. So the absolute crucial point here is that a clinician cannot just properly diagnose ASPD simply because an adult committed a serious or repeated crime. There absolutely has to be a documented childhood history to back it up. Moving right along to Section 3, understanding the psychopathy construct. Okay, get ready for a major, often shocking distinction here. Psychopath is actually not a separate official diagnosis in the current DSM. I know, right? Instead, it's what we call a forensic and research construct. It describes a very specific combination of traits, things like superficial charm, grandiosity, manipulation, pathological lying, shallow emotional responses, limited empathy, lack of remorse, irresponsibility, impulsivity, and persistent antisocial behavior. Lean into that dynamic for just a second. This construct beautifully blends what a person does with how a person feels, or rather, fails to feel. And one of the most famous tools used to assess this is the Hare Psychopathy Checklist Revised, or the PCLR. Now, I really want to address this directly with you because it is so important. The PCLR is a professional forensic instrument. It is not some online BuzzFeed quiz you can just reliably fill out to diagnose your ex after binge-watching a true crime documentary. It requires a highly qualified professional conducting clinical interviews, pulling verified records, and gathering extensive collateral information. It's the whole shebang.
Let's move to Section 4, ASPD versus psychopathy.
So while these two concepts overlap substantially, they are definitely not interchangeable. On one hand, ASPD is a DSM psychiatric diagnosis focused strictly on behavioral patterns, with that strict requirement for childhood history we talked about. But on the other hand, psychopathy is a forensic and research construct that goes way beyond just behavior. It heavily evaluates interpersonal and emotional traits. To put it super simply, ASPD asks heavily about what pattern of behavior you've demonstrated over time. Psychopathy, though, also asks how you actually relate to others emotionally.
Because of these differing criteria, I want you to imagine these as intersecting but totally distinct circles in a Venn diagram. A person can absolutely meet the diagnostic criteria for ASPD without ever reaching the threshold commonly used for psychopathy. And conversely, someone might demonstrate pronounced psychopathic traits, like that grandiosity and manipulation, without having some extensive record of criminal convictions.
Let's apply all this to Section 5, the charming psychopath myth.
So, how does all of this actually apply to Ted Bundy? Well, a famous study asked experienced mental health professionals to evaluate Bundy using biographical materials, and nearly 96% of them assigned him an ASPD diagnosis. But listen, strong retrospective evidence is not the same thing as a direct contemporary evaluation. You just can't ask a piece of paper follow-up questions, right? Confidently assigning an exact psychopathy score requires access to original, living, face-to-face evaluations.
Furthermore, Bundy is constantly held up as the ultimate proof that psychopaths possess this innate, irresistible charm. But let's really break that down for a second. People who actually interacted with him in real life did not experience him uniformly. While sure, some found him engaging, others found him incredibly unsettling, arrogant, immature, and downright suspicious. I mean, he wasn't James Bond. Charm in a forensic context doesn't mean genuine warmth or universal likability. It usually means a practiced ability to appear engaging only when it serves a specific, manipulative purpose.
We also really have to remember the context of where we usually see him. That courtroom footage shows a man who was acutely aware of the cameras. What looks like natural charm to us is often just impression management. It's a carefully cultivated, literal performance. Forensic evaluators know they can't just trust a polished interview. They have to compare that self-presentation with developmental history, institutional behavior, and independent records. You have to look behind the mask.
Which brings us to our final takeaway in Section 6. Explanation is not exoneration.
This is perhaps the absolute most central mantra in all of forensic psychology. A diagnosis or personality construct does not provide a complete explanation, and it certainly doesn't provide an excuse for murder. Bundy made repeated, purposeful decisions. His offenses involved deep preparation, concealment, and specific victim targeting. Understanding his psychological traits helps us explain his methods, his interpersonal behavior, and his chilling emotional detachment. But it does not transform his crimes into involuntary symptoms. It absolutely does not eliminate personal and legal responsibility. As we say, explanation is not exoneration.
All right, let's quickly summarize the 3 major forensic lessons we can take away here. Step 1. ASPD and psychopathy are related but firmly different concepts. Step 2. Criminal conduct alone is just not enough to establish either one. You need that developmental history and collateral records. And Step 3. Psychological language should be used to explain behavior and assess risk, not to turn an offender into some mythological monster or a criminal genius fed by true crime tropes.
And I really want to leave you with one highly important caveat here. Most people with psychological disorders are not violent. Most people with ASPD do not become serial killers. And not everyone with elevated psychopathic traits commits serious violence. Ted Bundy wasn't dangerous because he possessed some mysterious label. He was dangerous because he repeatedly chose predatory behavior, exploited trust, and inflicted devastating harm.
But learning that ASPD absolutely requires a documented history of behavioral problems before adulthood leaves us with a fascinating and deeply complex question. When a child or adolescent repeatedly violates rules and the rights of others, how do clinicians actually distinguish a severe conduct disorder from the effects of trauma, impulsive aggression, or just ordinary developmental immaturity? It's like a giant puzzle.
Well, that exact dilemma is exactly what we're going to unpack in our next explainer. We will examine the deeply nuanced and truly tragic case in Mary Bell to ask, is it conduct disorder, trauma, or both? You definitely won't want to miss it. See you then.